In this tutorial we're going to create a top-down assembly using the handset components that you've created earlier. So first off, open up a new assembly, and browse for the components. In this case we've got the back, front and the curly cord. There's also a screw which you'll need to bring in. You'll find that on the QUT website. So the first component I'm going to select is the back. Now I'm just going to hit the tick button, which means that it will locate that component with the it'll be fixed, and the origin of the component and the origin of the assembly will be coincident. So I'm just going to go and insert the other components now. I'll leave the curly cord for the time being. We'll put that in there in a minute, but I'm just going to select the front, and I'm going to do the same thing with the front. Insert component, and then the final thing will be the screws. So what I'm going to do is just insert one component, one screw, and then I'm going to show you how to copy that. So insert component, existing part, browse, and select the screw, and this time I'm just going to drop it anywhere in the assembly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that face. Well, actually no, I'll select the outer cylindrical face first, so I'll make a cylindrical mate. It's a little bit easier to do it this way around. Hit the mate button, and it's around the wrong way, so I need to just change the alignment like that. The next thing I want is that face there and this inner face here to be concentric. Hit OK. Now we need another screw in this assembly, so what I'm going to do, instead of just importing it and inserting it the same way that I did with the first screw, what we can do is just select, if you click on the screw on the feature manager tree, hold the control button down, and then just drag that out into the assembly area. You'll find you have another component. So we'll just make a couple of mates as we did before, just to put it in the right spot, and that one there. Now if you can't see the part, if it hides itself like that, it's often a good idea just to drag it out of the way, and so that you can see the faces that you want, and select those faces. Coincident has been selected by default, and then we have our components. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of the back and the front. So I'm going to go to Appearances, right click on the component, go to Appearances, select the back component, and I'm just going to change the colors just to make it a little bit easier to identify which is which. And I'm going to then select the front, and I'm going to make that a blue color. Right, so now it's just a little bit easier to see. In this next tutorial we're going to finish off the phone handset that you created in a previous tutorial. So by now you should have the phone handset assembly with your two components, your front and your back component, in the assembly. You should also have completed the curly cable part, and we're going to add that in at a later stage. Now so far the components that you've created, the phone handset, is actually quite basic. If you take a section through it, you'll see that it's really just a shell with no internal features whatsoever. Now the first thing you'll need to think about when you're creating a design such as this is obviously how you're going to hold the two components together. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some screw bosses in here, and we're going to assemble the thing with two being held together with two screws. So what we could do is we could use this component and we could cut some holes in it and put some bosses in, but there's a quicker way to do it. What you'll need to do is to go to the phone handset, which you may well have open. That's the original part, not the assembly. Okay, you'll notice they look very similar, but this is a part, not an assembly. And we're going to put the screw bosses into this component. The reason why we're going to do that is because we want to make it before the shell feature. So what we're going to do is if we cut some holes and then we shell after the holes have been cut, then the shell will form around those holes. Hopefully this will make a little bit more sense in a moment. So in order to put this feature where we want it to be, we need to roll back the feature manager tree to in front of the shell component. If you haven't done that before, just go down to the little blue line at the bottom of the feature manager tree, click on that and drag it above where it says the shell command. In fact, I'm going to drag it above the mirror command as well, so that we have, once we've cut this hole, it will also mirror the hole to the other side. Right, we're going to use a revolve cut to create the hole that we want. So we're going to create that on the right plane, create a sketch, and we're going to just make a couple of center lines, first a vertical one and then a horizontal one. Then we're going to make an axis of revolution for the cut revolve, and that axis of revolution wants to be 25 millimeters away from the origin, about 25. Next we're going to draw some lines. We want to have a shape like this. Now don't draw these lines vertical. We're going to have some taper on some of these lines. So we can have horizontal lines, but be careful you don't snap to the vertical. We just want to have these lines looking something like that. Okay, so we're going to put dimensions on that to put them in the right spot. So first dimension we're going to create will be the distance from the bottom of the hole to the origin. Okay, so we're going to make that dimension 7, so that the depth of the hole starts 7 millimeters below the origin. The next dimension is going to be that second step, which is going to be 10 below the origin. This next, the diameter of the bottom of the hole will be 4 millimeters diameter, so make sure we have a diameter hole there. Oh, okay, so it's clicked to radius, so I'll make that 2 radius. And this line here we're going to make 4 or 8 diameter, 4 radius, and the depth of this is going to be 25. It's actually not that critical because it's just there to fully define the sketch. And the last thing we're going to put on there is the angle, which we're going to put at 3 degrees. Now you'll see that both of them have changed. When I was drawing this, an automatic relationship was created between these two lines, and that made them parallel. So I put a 3-degree angle on one, and that's transferred to both of them. Right, all we need to do next is go into Features, Revolve Cut, and we're going to select the axis of revolution, which is this bit of construction geometry we've created here. Hit OK, and what you can see here is we have our hole for the screw boss created. So when we roll the feature manager tree back, you can see once that's mirrored, it's mirrored on both sides. And when we go to shell, if we have a look at the section view, we'll see now that we have that feature has got the shell wrapped around it. So that's saved us a lot of work in creating all this complex geometry around here. What we can also do is we can edit the shell command. So if we go to edit feature, now when we created this shell, we didn't select any faces to remove. Now we do have some faces that we'd like to remove, and if we select the bottom of these screws, because obviously these screw bosses want to be open, if we select both of those, what we'll now find is that we now have holes where we need them to be. Okay, now if we just roll things back again, we'll find that the split line goes through where it was and everything creates properly. A good idea is to name these solid bodies if you haven't done so already. Right click on them and go to body properties, and you can change the name there, or you can just do it just by double clicking on it and changing the name like you do with most Windows things. Now I've called the first one, this one here, the front, the red component the front, and I've called the blue one the back. Doesn't matter what you call it as long as it's something that makes sense to you. So what we're going to do next is we're going to create the screw boss that belongs to the back part, to the blue part, and we're going to use the face that is created by the top of the screw boss on the red part. So we're just going to select that, create a sketch on that face, go to convert entities, and that creates a circle around the outside of that screw boss. And then the inner side of the screw boss, we're just going to select that edge, go to convert entities, and then what we're going to do next is we're going to do a boss extrude, and we're going to extrude that up to body. So we're going to select the blue body to extrude up to. Now we want to have draft on that, or we need to have draft on this component, and we're going to have 3 degrees of draft and make sure that drafts outwards. Okay, so it should look something like that. Now hit OK. Now what you'll see is if you just follow that, you'll find that everything goes grey, and if you look at the top here, the 2 bodies have disappeared. It's become one body again. What that's done is this boss extrude has merged the 2 bodies together, which is not what we want. So it's easy fix. We just go back to edit the component, and you'll see down the bottom here where it's got feature scope, and we could have selected all bodies. What it's done is it's gone to selected bodies and it's selected both. Now you see that we've got the front and the back here. We don't want the front selected, we only want it to be attached to the back. So I'm just going to delete the front, and now it'll only attach itself to the back. So hit OK, and now you can see that screw boss has become blue, and we still have our 2 solid bodies, our front and our back. Okay, so that's very important. So we need two screw bosses, of course, so again it's fairly simple to mirror that. So we'll just select the front plane and the boss extrude that we've just created, go to mirror and hit OK, and now we have that mirrored on both sides. The final thing we're going to do is we're going to create a hole through both the components. Now we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to show you a little trick to creating something. We want to have a cut that cuts through this end part, and so we could create a sketch that's over here and then use that to cut through, or we can use the front plane. So I'm just going to use the front plane, create a sketch, and I'm not exactly sure where I want this to be, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this line here, convert entities, and that will give me the height for that hole, and I'm just going to turn this into some construction geometry and create one more center line vertically from the origin down to there, and that's the center of where the circle wants to be. So I'm going to draw an 8mm diameter circle on there. That should be 8. Actually not, let's make that 6. I'm changing my mind on the fly. So now if we want to do a cut extrude through all, reverse the direction, cut extrude, let's make it through all. It's in the right position, but it cuts through, we'll just hit OK, it'll cut through those screw bosses quite clearly, which is not what we want. So there's a way around that. If we go and edit the feature again, on the top here we've got from a sketch plane, and we've always left that on sketch plane, and normally 9 times out of 10 that's exactly what you do. But what you can do is you can go to, there's a couple of options from vertex, surface plane, etc. We can go to offset, and we can offset the start of that cut extrude, and I'm just going to offset it by 50mm, and you see what that now does is it leaves our screw bosses alone and it makes our cut where we want it to be. Okay, so that's all the editing we're going to do in the phone handset part. This is quite often called a base part, so let's call this the base part. The base part is pretty much finished. If we go back to our assembly, we'll now see when our assembly updates, what we'll have is our two components. With all those features that we've just created in the base part, they've transferred themselves over to our two, if you like, derived parts. Now, interestingly enough, I've inverted the colours on the part, but that's okay, it doesn't really matter because in fact, if anything, that'll remind us that we're in assembly mode rather than in base part mode. Okay. Now what we need to put some ribs in these components because they're not going to be strong enough as they are. What we can do is we can either edit them in the assembly, but what's often the case is easier just to open a part and edit the part as a standalone part. And what we're going to do next is I'm going to show you a feature called a rib feature. Now this is an extremely useful feature for creating internal ribs, which is a very, very common thing to create for components like this. So what we're going to do is create a sketch on the right plane, and I'm going to create a horizontal line. I'm just going to draw this fairly randomly. It doesn't matter how long it is, and what does matter though is the height of it. So I'm going to create a dimension from the origin to the height of this component. I'm going to just call that 4 millimeters. And as you can see, the ends of the line are blue, so they are not defined. They're nice and stretchy, and that really doesn't matter for the rib feature. And I'll just show you how to do that. We go to Features, Rib. And we've got a couple of options. You can see there's a little arrow here and there's a couple of yellow lines. The yellow lines designate the width of the rib, and we need to flip the direction down. We can either create the rib in a horizontal direction in this sense or in a vertical direction, and we can swap the direction that it extrudes in. Now we want a rib that's going to be 1 millimeter thick at the top, and we need to put some draft on it. We'll call that 1 millimeter draft. Hit OK, and what we'll find is that SolidWorks now creates a rib. It extends that line to the next bit of geometry that it comes across, and then it extends it down until it's completed that rib. So we can create more of these ribs. We can put one that goes through the middle. So I'll just create a sketch on the front plane and again create a line, a horizontal line. Now I'm being very careful to make sure that that line actually does extend and intersect with the face. If that line was too high up here, it wouldn't create a rib, because what it'll do is it'll extend that line and there's no face for it to intersect with. Okay, so I'll put a dimension on that. Again, just worried about the height at this stage. Call that 1 millimeter. And go to Features, Rib. And that's looking about right. It's defaulted to 1 millimeter. The direction is in the wrong direction. So we can either just double click on that and that flips it to the other side, or we can go to Flip Material side, put some draft on it, draft outwards, and hit OK. And that's created a rib where we want it to be. Now, ribs do have some limitations, and there are things that can and can't be done with ribs. As I said, the lines must always extend to another face, otherwise they're not going to work. What we can do though is we don't necessarily have to stick with one line. We can actually have two lines. So I'm going to create another sketch on the right plane. I'm just going to show you we can create we can create two lines like this and like that. So now you can see that that line is so we'll go to features, rib, and that all looks right. Now that'll create a rib with an edge on it. So you can create all sorts of different shaped ribs, but you can only create one rib at a time. Okay, so you can create an L-shaped rib, but you can't create anything else. Okay, I'll just edit this component. If, for example, I'd flipped it around the wrong way, we'd end up with a rib which goes, no, it's not bounded properly. Okay. So ribs can be mirrored, and the main thing to remember about ribs is that you can really only create one at a time. So your next thing will be to add in as many ribs as you think is necessary. I'm not going to tell you how many are necessary, but you should end up with a component that looks something like this. Okay, it doesn't have to look exactly like that, but something like that. Just remember that ribs the lines need to be bounded properly, and I think the best thing to do is to have a bit of an experimentation and see what you can come up with. So that's the back component, and the front component wants to look something like this. So you can add in ribs like that. This adds a lot of realism to the part because most plastic parts need some sort of ribs to give them enough structural strength. These cylindrical faces here were created with a rib. One was created as a rib, and then it was mirrored to the other side. You put draft on your ribs as much as you can, that's very important. And then the final thing will be to cut a series of holes, whatever sort of pattern you want, to make a realistic phone handset. And that's your phone handset components completed. The last thing we're going to do is to put them into an assembly, and I'll show you some neat things you can do with an assembly. When you return to your assembly, you'll find that all those changes that you've made to the components now are updated in the assembly. One of the useful things you can do with an assembly is if you right click on one of the components, go to change transparency, you can see that now that component is see-through, and you can see all the ribs and all the other features which would otherwise be hidden. So with the assembly we just need to add in a couple of other components. We need to add in those screws that I spoke of earlier and your curly cord. So we're going to add the screws in first, and the way to do that is just go insert component, existing part, and we're just going to browse for the screw. And again, the easiest thing to do is to just drop it in place, and next we're going to make a cylindrical concentric mate with these two cylindrical faces. Go to mates, and invariably it puts it around the wrong way, so we need to flip the alignment to the other way, and that's what we want. The second mate we're going to put on this is a mate that goes between this flat face here at the bottom of that first step of the screw boss and the inside face of the screw. Go to mates, and this is the great thing about it being transparent. You can see that that now is in exactly the right position that we want, and all we need to do is to create the second screw which goes in the other hole. Easiest way to do that is to use a mirror, part mirror, an assembly mirror. So if we go to assemblies, we've got mirror components underneath the linear components. So we select that, select a mirror plane to mirror around, and that's going to be the front plane. Now you can actually select planes that are on the components. It's much better to select one of these three planes that belongs to the assembly. Hit OK, and then your screw has been mirrored into the right spot. Very straightforward. The next thing we're going to do is put the curly cord in place. So if we go insert component, existing part, and browse for select the curly cord, and just drop that anywhere in the assembly. What you probably haven't made on your curly cord, which I didn't tell you at the time, was to make a little slightly larger cylindrical component just on the end of your curly cord. The reason why we need this is because we need to have a cylindrical face. All these other faces that are created are none of which are cylindrical. So we need to use that to create an assembly mate. So we're going to select that face, and then we're going to zoom into one of these little faces here, which is also cylindrical, create a mate, and we need to flip the alignment, hit OK, and now we have that curly cord mated around there. The next thing we need to do is just have a distance between one of these vertices here and that face. We're just going to have a distance. We're going to offset that by 3 millimeters. So now that's sitting pretty much in the right spot. And as you can see, we've got two mates on there, which means that it can't go backwards and forwards. The cable can rotate around like that. And I'm just going to leave it like that because that's fine for this particular instance. It means we can position the cable wherever is appropriate. Now the final thing we're going to do is we're going to create an exploded view of our assembly. The way we do that is we go to the Configurations tab, and we right click on the configuration and we go to New Exploded View. With an exploded view, it's a way of just taking parts away from each other so that we can demonstrate how an assembly might take place. So it makes sense to follow a logical order in which these things are disassembled. So in this case, the first thing we would do is to remove the screws. So what we do is we select both these screws. So we've got down here in settings, we select the components which we want to explode. And then we go over to this little triad over here. This is the one that tells us which direction that the components are going to move in during the exploding steps and the collapsing steps. So we want to move it in the same direction and the reverse direction of this particular arrow. So what we do is we click on this arrow and we just drag the components out. Okay, so what I've done is I've accidentally selected the wrong component. I've selected the handset instead. So what I'm just going to do is just delete that component, and I'm going to edit the step, and I'm just going to go back and I'm going to select the right component. Okay, so if I apply that, now the two screws have been moved. The next step will be to create another component. So we want to select the front of the handset, and again we want to move that in the same direction but not as far, so to there. And then the final thing is we select the back component and move that out to there, and we'll also move the curly cord as well. So we select that, and this time we're going to move it in the direction outwards, the blue direction. Okay. Hit OK. Now we have an exploded view, and we can now animate. We can now collapse this view so it goes back to as it normally should be, or we can animate an explosion. So now the components are going in the same order that we created them. We can also create a loop so that it'll explode and then collapse continuously. And we can then also create a animation of this. So if you go to little file, save animation to file button, we can create an animation of that. We can also use, if you look at the renderer, we can either do it straight from the SolidWorks screen, which will show us just what we've got there, or we can go to photo view, which will give us a photorealistic rendering. Whilst I'd encourage you to have a go at creating some rendered movie files, it's not part of the submission requirement for this particular assignment. The reason for that is that this type of thing, although it's very, very useful, can soak up an incredible amount of time. In this case, just submit what you have here as that assembly in its exploded form. And there you have it, it's all complete.